My story. In 1999, I met my now wife, a former wayward FWW, when she was 19 and I was 23. We were each other's first romantic relationship, and we married in a large ceremony in front of all of our family members in 2003. Things were going well before to our marriage, and for the first year or so, a lot of love, a lot of affection, and a lot of good moments. Neither of us would have guessed in a million years that the other would cheat on the other. After she graduated from college in 2004, she began to suffer from depression. She was turned down by business after company, and she felt lost, alone, and useless. She'd remain at home while I went to work, with no friends or support system nearby. She experienced intense suicidal thoughts, yet she never tried suicide. Meanwhile, I was finding a lot of satisfaction in my hobby/sport of motorcycle racing, and I was devoting more and more of my time to it. I was worried about my wife's sadness and was able to put in a good word for her at the firm I worked for, which was in a major corporate setting. She interviewed in early 2005 and was hired, which I assumed would cure her of her situational sadness. Things will soon improve, I reasoned. She was employed with a male counterpart, the future AP, who was around my age and single. They sat next to one another and interacted often as part of their joint daily job. I sat in a queue only a few doors away from both of them, completely unaware of the peril that was about to occur. AP would flirt with my wife in a pleasant manner, joking with her and making her laugh. He was simply a good man, she reasoned. I met him a couple times and didn't think much of it, since he was her colleague. Boundaries were gradually breached when my wife freely communicated some personal information with him, namely that I was more interested in my motorbike than in her. He'd say things like, "I wish I had a girlfriend like you, and your spouse is very blessed." My wife says she was so ignorant that she didn't see any of them as signs that he was romantically/dually interested in her, but she acknowledges that they both got more and more emotionally connected. Their employer sent them both on a business trip out of state after a few months of emotional grooming. They were seated next to one another on the aircraft, and during the trip, her AP prompted the star of the PA. He grasped her hand in his and held it tightly. This, according to my wife, was a significant surprise and the first overt indication that he intended to take things to the next level. My wife elected not to withdraw her hand, so starting the deconstruction of our marriage and a series of events that would permanently impact our relationship. My wife and AP boarded an elevator to return to their separate hotel rooms after arriving at their destination and meeting with coworkers. AP walked over and kissed my wife after the door closed. It was like something out of a pop romance movie, as she described it. She once again let this happen and accepted it. AP then asked her into his room, where they proceeded to kiss, and he removed his trousers. She paused as he began to remove her pants. She hadn't expected all of this to happen so quickly, and she wasn't psychologically prepared to take that step, much to his dismay and scorn. However, there was never a hard prohibition against this occurring at a later date. When they returned from their vacation, my wife realized she had owed the line. It was just a matter of time until I found out and kicked her out, she reasoned. There was no turning back now. I was staying late at work for almost a week following the business trip to accomplish a large assignment. Her AP had asked her to his house while I was at work. According to her, she expected them to just speak or maybe make out again. Maybe speak about how continuing things wasn't a smart idea. When she entered his bedroom, he took her pantyhose off, yanked her arms down, and penetrated her. Her initial reluctance eventually gave way to ready involvement. AP reached a climax 3 times. She came once just by penetration, something I've never been able to achieve for her. They hugged after that, and she drove home to me, completely unaware of what had just happened. It was at this time that their shady romance took off. Over lunch breaks, weekends at his place while I was racing, and even him coming over to our apartment to screw on our sofa on one occasion. On one occasion, I had with both him and myself on the same day. Every day, her AP was in her ear, making me a villain and attempting to get her to abandon me. I was the uncaring spouse who was fully dehumanized. He wanted to love bomb her, and she find it irresistible. She says she had no idea how shallow and generic his comments were since she had no prior love experience apart from me. There was talk of a future together. There were presents. There were lunchtime visits to his house for. As I worked late, they would both attend a weekly salsa dance lesson. She equated our mature relationship to the thrill of a new romance, and I was being put to the test without my awareness. Every time, I would fall short of AP expectations in every way. They started talking about how she was going to leave me and then start their relationship openly. My wife informed me about a month or so after their PA began that she wanted to move out to her own home when our lease on our apartment expired the next month. I was stunned, taken aback, and sprung into action. My concerns about our marriage were that she wasn't supportive of my racing and that she was too clingy and needed to acquire a pastime and friends so that I wasn't the only one who had to give everything for her. This was her motivation for moving out, so she could learn to be more self-sufficient. I enrolled us in marital therapy and took her on a costly 3-day weekend excursion, showering her with presents and attempting to persuade her not to move out. I still didn't know anything about the affair, but I had my suspicions at this point. I questioned her directly many times whether she was having an affair, and each time she denied it. There were several signals that I decided to ignore or bury. Her sister contacted me a few weeks before move-out day and asked me not to race that weekend at an important event for me. She had lately discovered my wife's adultery. My FWW sister was outraged with my FWW, but she wouldn't tell me since she was devoted to her sister. One of my many regrets is that I disregarded her sister's pleadings. That weekend, I was in a bad car accident and shattered my collarbone. The incident was a watershed moment for me, and I chose to give up racing for the time being in order to concentrate on saving my marriage. Moving day came and went, and I was confronted with the fact that this was all true. I believe my wife was likewise struck by a feeling of doubt and developing ambivalence as a consequence of fractures in AP veneer, but coupled with a sense of exhilaration spurred by her adoration for him. Her strategy, I think, was to strangle our relationship to death, starting with moving out and then coming out with AP as a type of rebound relationship. She's characterized it today as a scheme imposed on her by her AP. I was phoning her and wanted to spend time with her whenever I could to alleviate my terrible loneliness at the moment. She was the only one who could make me feel better. I picked her up one day to go hang out at my new studio apartment, and I was telling her how strongly I wanted her back living with me, that I was going to stop racing and concentrate only on her and us, and she finally broke down. When she admitted to the affair, my first instinct was to assure her that I would forgive her and accept her back if she stopped. In some ways, I was relieved because I had finally received a diagnosis for what had been stealthily eroding our marriage. I recall her running into the toilet and texting her AP, "I love you no matter what happens," as if she believed I was a threat to her, and those were her last loving words. D-Day was one of the most emotionally draining experiences I'd ever had. My wife was taken aback by my response since she had assumed this was the end of the road and sounded willing to attempt to recover. She went over to AP Place and attempted to break up with him, but he groveled, wept, and wouldn't let her go without her committing to commit to leaving me again. Her ambivalence grew with every minute she spent with him, and there was once an explicit agreement that we would but every time we discussed it more, she changed her mind. It seemed like I was being dragged along on an emotional torture rack. I wanted to go to HR at work in the hopes that they'd dismiss him so they wouldn't be together during the day, but I was worried that my wife would accuse me of following them and then I'd be fired. If that occurred, I'd be much more out of the picture than if I were just a few doors down. So there was a 2-month tug of war between her AP and myself for the prize of my wife. I had to play the good person, and AP began to do a few things that made my wife doubt him. He lied about having an STD test so he could have unprotected with my wife, and he also promised her he would procure prostitutes. When she discovered he had a second girlfriend, he lied about being exclusive with her. He acknowledged to having been charged with in the past. He would go around town bicycles and talk about it publicly. He lied about his race in order to get admission to a famous institution. He wanted to desecrate our marriage bed by having with my wife in it. This guy's character was the lowest of the bottom, yet he could always put the proper words together to persuade my wife that everything was okay and normal. He was also losing patience with my wife and began publicly seeing a new female in an effort to make her jealous. Finally, when I realized that my wife was likely to side with me in any workplace conflict, I went to HR, and the decision was made to terminate the AP. At this moment, AP recognized that my wife had finally chosen sides, so he packed his belongings and departed, and they never talked again, according to her. We remained married and purchased a home together the next year. We were pregnant the next year. We subsequently relocated out of state for a job I accepted and had 2 more children. We have now been 16 years since D-Day. I've gone long periods of time without thinking about it, but it still resurfaces from time to time and causes me to have negative thoughts that I fight to this day. I've been the victim up until this point. However, the shoe has been on the other foot. I got to porn, which drove me to seek out prostitutes and massage parlors to cope with my emotions and the unfairness of things. I maintained my addiction a secret for 4 years until my wife discovered it one day. She was upset, and it reaffirmed all of her deep-seated anxieties about being unwanted and ugly, which had contributed to her vulnerability to having an affair in the first place. I wasn't sure whether she would forgive me, but after agreeing to go to counseling and SA, she gave me another opportunity, just as I had given her one. I haven't seen an escort in more than 5 years. She also had to live with my lack of interest in with her for years, while I focused all of my energy elsewhere. She thought I had become. Today, we are at a much better place in our marriage, but it is wounded by our errors in the past. What does the fact that we are still together say about us as a couple? In both circumstances, I'm sure most people would be out the door. We are two flawed individuals who refuse to give up on each other.